Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the Hall of Horror series. And it's book number 3, The Five Masks of Dr. Screem. Now this book is a special edition. I got this book early on when I started collecting and getting into Goosebumps again. I went to local bookstores to see what was new, and this book caught my eye, and I've always had a thing about this cover. It's so captivating. I think Dorman did a really good job on this cover. I like the raised feeling of it, and it feels good being a thick book. It just feels like a solid book to want to open and read. So the cover appeals there, and reading the back blurb, it's a Halloween story. Reading about masks, it gave me the haunted mask vibes. Upon reading it though, it's not really like the haunted mask. It wasn't really like what I thought it would be as well, but I can say that I'm pretty impressed by this book. Given, modern Goosebumps for me have been hit or miss, and most of the misses are basically because of originality. They just lack originality, and I'm getting to the point when I'm reviewing modern Goosebumps that I will praise the books that aim for originality more than playing it safe and doing something that works but's already been done before. This book is pretty original, and I tip my hat to Stein for attempting to do something great with this book. I'm not saying it's a great book or anything. As I'll get into the review, I'll basically say, why I like it, but I don't love it, kind of thing. But yeah, this book was pretty solid in that aspect. The originality's there. It's a fun Halloween story. It's something that's really never been done as far as a Halloween story and even an adventure story, which this is more akin to. But yeah, I'd say I like this. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So this girl named Monica and her younger brother Peter are about to go trick-or-treating on Halloween. Monica has invited her friends to come trick-or-treating with her, but unfortunately for her, she has to take her younger brother Peter, who is, I think, like a year or two younger than her. And she does not like this at all because Peter is extremely annoying to her friends. And what I mean by that is Peter is obsessed with karate. He's like a tall, skinny, blonde kid, and he's a very hyperactive kid. But he has this one problem where he's just rambunctious and he just knocks into everything and he hits things and he karate chops things and karate kicks things. And this makes Monica really upset a lot of the time. And no different on Halloween. He dresses up like a karate, dojo fighter. And Monica and Peter and Monica's friends go trick-or-treating for a little bit. And something happens to where Peter has to apologize to one of Monica's friends because he did something bad. And he offers her a condolence. And basically says, pick whatever candy you want out of my bag and call it even. And the girl tries to pick up a Snickers, and he goes, no, not that one. And she goes, you're such a jerk, we're out of here. And Monica gets really mad at Peter because Peter's favorite candy bar is a Snickers, and he's like on this trip trick-or-treating on Halloween to get as much Snicker bars as he can and fill up his huge bag that's like, I think the book describes it as probably like this big, and he's like only halfway full. And Monica's like, there's no way you're going to fill that whole bag. And he goes, well, I'm going to try to do that. So Monica realizes what time it is. It's getting late. They should probably head back at a good time before the parents start worrying. But the last house Peter hit, this is a really funny scene, by the way. Peter goes up to a house, and the person at the door tries to hand him an apple, and Peter says, no, I do not take apples. It's something like that, and just made me break out in laughter. It was so funny. And Peter comes back to Monica and is like, no, this is not a good way to end Halloween. We have to go hit one more street. I have to get some candy now, to make up for that. So Monica says, all right, we'll go hit one more block, You've already ruined my night. Might as well just be miserable. But I'm not trick-or-treating. I'm just going to sit on the sidewalk and watch you while you do it. So when they make their way over to the street, they start to realize that none of the lights are on, and they get kind of worried. And until they see this one house that kind of has like this dim light going on inside, and they thought, since they're kind of lost, maybe they can go ask them for directions how to get back to their street. And when they go up to this house, they're basically led in to this house, and they encounter this strange woman named Bella. Now, Bella says, I knew you would come. And they said, what are you talking about? And she brings up this book called the Hallows Book. Now, the Hallows Book is like this magic book, basically, that kind of predicts the future, or it's telling the story as it happens. It's a really cool fourth wall breaker of the story. Basically, the book reads, this book prophesies that you will come help me tonight on Halloween to defeat the evil of these 5 masks that are owned by this person by the name of Dr. Screem. Now, Monica and Peter are really scared now. They basically can't leave because this woman's, she's a pretty scary looking woman. Not too scary, but she is scary enough to kind of intimidate you and make you feel like you're trapped, kind of thing. And she gets into explaining Dr. Screem and how he's evil, and how for this Halloween they need to help her get these masks from him so that they can destroy the evil and hopefully destroy Dr. Scream in the process. Now, this bearded man comes in, presumably Dr. Scream, comes in and tries to steal the masks from Bella's house, which he successfully does, and which he apparently does this every single Halloween. And Bella screams at the kids to try to stop him, but the kids can't stop him. And now the book has prophesized that Monica and Peter have to go find the masks that Dr. Scream spreads around to hide from Bella each Halloween. And they kind of refuse at first, and then they flat out refuse, and they escape from the house, and they get away, and they run down the block, and they eventually found how they got there, and they end up back to where their house is. But when they get there, they realize that their house is missing. And this really freaks the kids out. Like, this was probably freaked me out too, come to think about it. Like, you just had this scary interaction with this woman and this creepy guy coming in to steal some masks, and you go to go back home, and your home's not even there. So Monica and Peter put 2 and 2 together that maybe the house disappeared because of Dr. Scream, and maybe they have to go help Bella get the masks so that they can get the parents back. So Monica and Peter go back to Bella's house, unwillingly, but they have to. And when they go back, they agree to help, and then this basically ushers in Act 2 of the book. Now, Act 2 of the book basically is Monica and Peter going to find these masks. Now, what's cool about each of these masks, I'll go in and name them off for you. There is a bug mask, there is a mummy mask, there is a Himalayan wolf mask, there is a skull mask, and there is an alien pig mask. And each of these masks are riddled with different powers or different abilities, and the goal of getting the masks are you basically have to put them over your head and wear them, because if you encounter Dr. Scream while you're hunting the masks, Dr. Scream's just going to take them out of your hands, so you have to wear them, because that's the only way Dr. Scream's magic can't take the mask from you. So it comes to the first mask, which is a bug mask, and they stumble across it in a field. And when they stumble across the mask, Monica happens to be the first person they have to put the bug mask on, and it's really gross how this mask is described, like bugs are crawling over your face and stuff, but she has to do it because her and Peter made a deal. They'll alternate who puts on the mask. Now, when she puts on this mask, it kind of does 2 things. When you put on the mask, you have to deal with the abilities of the mask while you're wearing it, but at the same time, when you put on the mask, it transports you to a different place. And the first place it transports them to is a field full of giant bugs, and they have to find their way out of the field and recoup and maybe go back to Bella's house to try to figure out what to do next. And basically, every time they find a mask, they have to escape, and then they have to go back to a certain point, and then they have to think about where the masks could be if they're hidden. So after they find the bug mask, they realize the next mask would be the mummy mask, which, by the way, I think they kind of touched on that in part one, what the masks look like, but I'm very impressed on how these kids remembered how these masks look. You know, come to think about it, it's kind of like a little mild plot hole there. But next up is the mummy's mask, and Peter thinks, oh, it has to be at a museum because there's a mummy party for Halloween going on there. That's the perfect place for it. So Monica and Peter head to the museum, even though Monica's kind of hesitant and trusting Peter's intelligence, which is kind of some commentary going on Monica's end in this part of the story. But Monica goes with Peter to the museum, and sure enough, after evading security and trying to sneak off and sneaking their way in, they find the mask. Now, when Peter puts on the mask, this time, it transports them to an Egyptian desert with pyramids around, and there's a bunch of robed, like, shamans. And these robed shamans are, like, humming some, like, ritual and stuff, and they have to basically escape them because they're trying to basically sacrifice the kids to the gods. And when Peter and Monica escape, they find an exit door, and when they peer through the window, it takes them out to where they actually should be. And I guess they're a plane of reality, which this story doesn't do the greatest job in explaining when you put on the mask and it transports you to point B, what the connection is from point B to point A. It doesn't really elaborate on that all too well, but in a nutshell, basically that's how each situation unfolds. So once they find their way out of the alternate reality with the Egyptian pyramids, they end up back to square one basically, and they have to find the Himalayan wolf mask, which they put two and two together. There's a place in town called Wolf Hill, and Dr. Screem has been kind of hiding these masks in places that kind of fit the theme or the name of the mask. And they go to Wolf Hill, which they have to climb this mountain, and there's a scene where Monica basically almost falls off a mountain here. But there's like this dog wearing this wolf mask, and Dr. Screem put it on the dog. And Monica is able to get the mask, and she pulls it down over her head on top of the bug mask. And this time it transports them to like a snowy mountain. And on the snowy mountain, they basically Monica finds herself transforming into a werewolf basically. And she has to have Peter pull her back to reality a little bit so they can defeat the masks or the mask evil that it's doing, and they can make their way back to square one again, which they do. And this time it comes to find the skull mask. Now the obvious answer to find skulls is a graveyard. Now this is where the story kind of gets weird. So they go to the graveyard, and of course they encounter skeletons coming to life, and they find this open grave, and Peter falls into the open grave. Same thing with Monica. When they get in, they notice something coming out of the dirt, and of course it's Dr. Screem in his robe wearing the skull mask. Now, Dr. Screem basically says, I don't know what Bella has told you about me, but I'm actually the good guy. Now, Bella gave a series of warnings to Monica and Peter and early on in the story, saying that he's really good at lying, you should not believe him. And Monica's like, well, I'm not going to trust your lies. But somehow Dr. Screem gets Peter alone in this tunnel, in this big open grave that Monica discovers, and Peter and Dr. Screem disappear. And Monica has no idea how to go from here now, so they go back. She goes back to Bella's house, and then when she goes back to Bella's house, there's a big revelation that happens. Basically, find out what happens to Peter. He you find out what happens to the skull mask and the fifth mask at the same time, which is the alien pig mask. And let's just say there's a climax between Bella and Dr. Scream. I won't even call it that, but basically it's kind of like, no, I'm the good guy. No, I'm the good guy. And let's just say that they both kind of disappear. Now, when they disappear, everything seems to revert back to normal for Monica and Peter, and they go back to their house, and everything is how it should have been. They're back on Halloween night. It's like the whole ordeal of them going to hunt for, Dr. Scream's masks all night never happened. And then when they get to their house, surprise twist. And I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, in a nutshell, that is the 5 masks of Dr. Scream. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I liked the originality. I liked the adventure setup. Normally, adventure Goosebumps does not do it for me all that well, but this was pretty fun. I kind of like the fantasy element. I think it leaned a little heavy into the adventure side more than the spooky Halloween side. So it felt kind of different for a Halloween book off the bat. And I'm not saying that's a negative, but I'm saying that it's something, I guess it's a positive. It's something that I kind of like about it. I kind of like how it kind of sheds the mold, or, what you think this book would be going into it. I really appreciated that. Monica and Peter end up coming full circle in their relationship. Monica and Peter start out not liking each other, and then at the end, they kind of, reconcile, and they learn to grow close together because of the whole ordeal they went through. And I always like stories like that where, characters grow and they learn something and they change from it. Monica and Peter were pretty good sibling characters for that aspect. And honestly, the whole finding the mask things and taking you to different places was really fun. Like, I liked how it played into, like, the mummy tropes, and it played into the Himalayan mountain tropes, like, like those, Yeti type stories, or Yeti beasts, or wolf beast stories. The bug stuff was pretty good as well. Of course, in Halloween you got to go to a graveyard. Just really fun stuff. For a Halloween book, just spooky this, spooky that. But it was a little bit different in each scenario, and it wasn't like the same thing where, you encounter some type of monster. Sometimes the character became the monster. Sometimes you just had to encounter monsters, and sometimes you just had to, like, pray that you get out alive. I like that. It was a little bit different. However, I do have some mild negatives with this. It's not going to be the biggest negatives in the world, but I do have a problem with part 2 being insanely longer compared to the part 1. I felt like part 1 needed a little more exposition and setup with the Dr. Scream and Bella thing. I felt like it just threw you to the wolves, kind of. And what I mean by that is part 1 ends at like the page 50 mark, and then the rest of the book is part 2, which is, in this book, is like 170 plus pages. So yeah, I think part 1 could have been elaborated on a little bit, but what we got kind of worked. But another negative I have with this is just, this book, for being a special edition, and I guess I'm going to be kind of harsh on it now, for being a special edition and having all these pages, it does not need to feel this rushed. I mean, that's one thing about the read of this. It feels kind of jumpy. And what I mean by jumpy is it feels kind of like rushing from point A to point B to point C to point D in the story. And it literally spits you out right into the action from like chapter 1. It doesn't stop. It's like nonstop velocity. And I feel like the story doesn't take time to breathe and expand on anything. I feel like there's good ideas there, but because of the pace, nothing gets elaborated on. And I think that's kind of a mild pacing issue with this story, because given the length, I would hope to have a better resolution in the climax, especially with Bella and Dr. Scream, which I think, aside from those little idiosyncrasies with how the mask teleports you places and how you have to wear the mask to defeat Dr. Scream's evil, and I don't want to spoil the whole 5th mask thing, but let's just say that was kind of a bust, an alien pig mask we never really got to see. But yeah, the whole thing with Dr. Scream and Bella just felt lackluster, I would say. It was like, okay. It wasn't good or anything. It was just like, okay, that's that. You know, kind of like, you know, spritzing it up by the end. But yeah, the climax was kind of a letdown, I would have to say. But yeah, with those little problems I have, they're not the biggest problems. You know, with a book this length, it has originality. It does play a lot more into the story, and it does add a lot more to the plot doing that. But those little issues in the grand scheme don't really hurt the book all that much, but it does take some points away and kind of hurt it from being an A for me. So when it comes from a 0 to 5-star rating, I deducted 0.6 accumulative for all those problems I mentioned, because like I said, they're not the greatest, detriments to the book, but they are detriments. So I gave this book a 4.4 out of 5, which is a very high B for me, and it's, I think, the third best Hall of Horrors books I've read. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I like the Halloween atmosphere, and I really dig it. So yeah, I like it, but I don't love it. High B. So let me know in the comment section if you have read The Five Masks of Dr. Scream. Did you love it or did you hate it? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.